Welcome to Quiet Scare, where horror doesn't scream, it whispers, real documented experiences, thoughtfully adapted into literary horror narration for sophisticated listeners. The promise is simple, documentary truth preserved, atmosphere enhanced, a calm voice guiding the dark, without gore or jump scares. Please like and subscribe and tap the bell for new episodes. There are no more than 3 ads in the first 15 minutes. After that, uninterrupted listening, curated accounts, elevated with careful storytelling for nights when quiet dread is the point. Sleep well and dream dark. You don't expect anything weird to happen when you're just trying to get through a night shift. That night, I was on Route 67, just past 1 a.m., heading south through a slice of nowhere between rusted-out factories and pine-slick ridges. I drive contract hours for a courier company. Long shifts. Little contact. Mostly just me, the road, and whatever podcast I can stomach without falling asleep. That night, it was an Old Moth episode on in the background. Something about a guy who accidentally joined a cult in rural Oregon. I wasn't really paying attention, though. The fog was getting thick, and the road kept narrowing in weird ways like it was collapsing in on itself. I passed a sign for Caldwell Textile, long defunct. Whole area looked like someone had turned off the world 20 years ago and never flipped it back on. My coffee was running cold. My bladder was making a case for a pit stop. That's when I saw him. A guy standing on the gravel shoulder. No vehicle, no bag. Just standing there like someone waiting for a bus that was never going to come. He had a brown jacket and jeans both soaked up to the shins, and he looked straight at me. I wasn't planning to stop. I'm not dumb. But something about how out of place he looked made me tap the brakes. Maybe it was the eyes. Wide open but unreadable. Not scared. Not relieved. Just there. I rolled the window halfway. "You alright?" He stepped closer. "Heading south. Just need a lift to the next town. Got stranded." His voice didn't shake. No accent. Flat. Low. Eyes still locked on mine. No car in sight, no phone in his hand. I should have kept going, but I didn't. "What? Yeah, okay, get in." He nodded once, climbed in, and shut the door gently like he'd been in the car 100 times before. He didn't smell like a guy who'd been stranded, which I noticed right off. No sweat, no diesel, no mildew. He smelled clean, like wet laundry. We didn't talk much. I asked where he was coming from, and he said up north. I asked where he was headed, and he just said down the ridge. Vague, but not suspicious yet. I clocked his hands. Clean. No dirt under the nails. He was holding something in his lap, a drawstring gym bag. Looked new. That, and the fact his jacket still had the plastic logo from some chain store stitched into the cuff, caught my eye. We were only about 5 miles down the road when we came up on the roadblock. Flashing lights cut through the fog before we saw the cruisers. 2 state patrol vehicles parked nose out into the road. 1 floodlight sweeping side to side like a lazy lighthouse. There was another cruiser across the other lane, with cones out. 1 officer waved us down. I slowed, rolled the window down again. "Evening," he said. "Late 30s, standard buzz cut. Where you two headed?" "Just me," I said automatically. The passenger didn't look at me, didn't flinch. I pointed ahead. "Through to Denton. Courier route, want to see my manifest." The officer glanced past me toward the guy. "You pick him up back there?" "Yeah." Said he was stranded. "Can I see both your IDs?" I handed mine over. The guy reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a wallet. He handed over a driver's license. The officer took them both, walked back to his cruiser. That was the first moment I noticed something. The guy next to me didn't blink, just stared out the windshield, breathing steady, still holding the bag in his lap. His left pant leg was wet to the knee, right one dry. His shoes looked like they had recently been hosed off. I was still processing that when the officer returned. "You know him?" I shook my head. "No, I swear. Picked him up 10 minutes ago." He looked me over like he was deciding if I was full of it. "You didn't see what was on that phone." "No. You didn't ask his name before picking him up." I mean, no. He paused. Then he handed my license back. All right, you're clear to go. Just stick to 67. Don't take any side routes. I drove away with the window down and my brain spinning. The Moth podcast had restarted on its own. I couldn't listen. I turned it off. It was too quiet after that. There were questions I should have asked earlier, and now I couldn't stop thinking about them. Why was only one leg wet? Why was his bag clean when the rest of him was soaked? Why did he lie about his name? And what the hell could have come through that phone to make him bolt like that? I never found out. They didn't catch him. I checked local news for a week. Nothing. No manhunt. No update. Just a vague blur buried in the regional section about an ongoing investigation following a traffic incident in Pendry County. That was it. I still drive the same route, same hours. Nothing about that night got me fired or flagged. I guess nobody wanted to admit how much they didn't know. I pass Caldwell Textile once or twice a week. Still boarded up tighter than ever. Still drive past the same rusted out train cars where he disappeared. Sometimes I think I see someone on the shoulder. Same brown jacket. Same still posture. I don't stop anymore. Let somebody else be the good guy. I wasn't trying to run away from anything. That's what I told people. Truth was, I didn't want to hear my name for a while. You go through something, divorce, layoffs, a public breakdown in a Kroger parking lot, and suddenly everyone thinks they have to check in. No thanks. I wanted air, not advice. So I headed into the Appalachian wilderness with my pack, tent, and a mental health strategy that boiled down to, if I don't see another human for 3 days, I'll be okay again. The trail I picked wasn't on the state maps. That was the point. It was late October, off-season, cold. The kind of cold that makes your face feel like cardboard by 4 p.m. Perfect. I hiked in 10 miles past the posted sites. Creekside terrain, dense leaf cover, ridges to the east. I set up camp just before sunset. One-person tent, no fire. I boiled water with the stove and ate something that tasted like regret and beef stroganoff. By 9 p.m., everything was dark. Not dark like rural town, but dark like your hand disappears in front of your face. And quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even a frog, just the creek, 30 feet downslope, sounding like it always had somewhere else to be. At some point past midnight, I woke up. Not startled, just aware. I don't know why. The cold maybe, or the silence breaking. There was a sound. One I didn't register right away because it wasn't loud. Just out of place. It was a cough. A human cough. Not dry, not exaggerated. The kind people try to stifle, about 20, maybe 30 feet away. I waited, no follow-up. I didn't unzip the tent. Not yet. Just lay there, heartbeat kicking up, eyes locked on the tent fabric like it could tell me something. I thought could be another camper. Could be a ranger. But I hadn't seen anyone all day. No tire tracks at the trailhead. No footprints but mine. And who camps that close to someone else out here? I sat up quietly, slipped on my jacket, reached for the headlamp but didn't turn it on. Then I unzipped the tent halfway and looked out. There was nothing. The trees were dark shapes. The creek a silver cut through black. But on the far side of the creek, across maybe 15 feet of water, something moved. A figure, standing at the edge, facing the water. Not hunched, not waving or signaling. Just there, not looking at me. No flashlight, no movement, just upright. I didn't call out. That's the part I keep circling back to. I didn't even whisper. I just watched. After a minute, maybe less, the figure leaned down like to scoop water, then stood back up. I blinked. And it was gone. Not walked off. Not ducked down. 1 second it was there. The next. Nothing. No rustle of leaves. No splash. I stayed frozen for a while. Listening. Waiting for something to make sense. Eventually I got out. Turned the headlamp on low. Walked to the creek. Crossed on stones. I wasn't thinking clearly. Or maybe I was thinking too clearly, which is worse. There were footprints, bare, human, clear in the mud, facing the water, but only one set, no others coming in or out, just there. I backed up, flashlight on the ground now. Nothing in the trees, nothing above the bank. I scanned for clothes, gear, anything, but it was just leaves, water, prints, cold air, and the weirdest part, there was no steam. In that weather, standing near Cold Creek water should give off breath, but the person thing never steamed. I didn't even notice until later. I packed up in 20 minutes, shoved the tent half folded into my bag, left food, didn't care. I made the full 10-mile hike back out in the dark. Not rational, not safe, but I couldn't stay there, not even until dawn. The trail back was sharper somehow, like the trees were closer, like the dark pressed against me. Every sound was a sound I didn't want to identify. I kept looking back even when I told myself not to. I reached the trailhead just after 6 a.m., called the ranger station once I had signal. They were polite, that kind of careful polite they reserve for people who maybe skipped their medication. One guy asked if I could come in and make a statement, just to cover all our bases. I did. They wrote it down, nodded a lot. One ranger, kid about my age, asked what the person looked like. I told him I didn't know, just a figure. About 6 feet tall, no flashlight, no steam. He said we get those sometimes. I asked what he meant. He shrugged. Reports like that, this side of the forest especially. Never any real danger, just weirdness. Might have been a sleepwalker or somebody playing tricks. You were near Slate Creek, right? I nodded. He said nothing more. I haven't gone camping since. I sleep with noise now, fans, radios, anything. And when I shower, I leave the bathroom door open, just in case. I still think about the figure. I don't think it wanted to scare me. It didn't even know I was there. That's what keeps me up sometimes. It wasn't trying to cross a boundary. It just didn't know one existed. I spent my spring break patching up strangers and sleeping in a tent because that's how I reset. I'm a trauma surgeon. I volunteer with a veterans search and rescue group out of Roanoke. If I'm not on call, I hike the Appalachian sections near McAfee Knob and Tinker Cliffs. I keep a small kit in my pack because people fall, people panic, people bleed. It was warm enough that the ground kept its damp smell all day. We parked at the trailhead off Catawba Road on a Friday, early. My companion was Kyle, also a veteran. He prefers we keep walks quiet. I don't argue because he's better company when he's listening. We logged out on the trail register because that's what you do. Then headed in with steady legs and the boredom that means you packed right. By noon, we had the campsite on the ridge above a well-traveled switchback. It's one of those established clearings with a ring of stones and a bear line already slung between two oaks. I claimed the flattest bit of dirt with my two-person tent. Kyle strung a tarp because he says tents make him feel pinned. I boiled water. He checked the map even though we knew this stretch blind. We ran a simple kind of quiet. I had 3 texts from the hospital scheduling coordinator reminding me about a CPR skills check I'd done twice already. I sent back the form again. Then I spent 10 minutes wrestling the online login because the portal resets your password if you breathe near it. I told Kyle the portal might be the one thing we can't fix with a splint and tape. He said that wasn't funny, and it wasn't meant to be, but it still felt good to say it. Around mid-afternoon, a ranger came up the trail. Short, squared-off build, sun-marked face, badge and a nameplate. Wallace. He did the routine. Anyone up ahead? Any bears? Any odd noise? We said no. He asked to see our permits. We showed the day-use pass and he glanced at our pack tags. He asked where we planned to camp. I pointed to the clearing and kept it friendly. He told us they'd had a handful of welfare calls the past week. A few reports of a man sleeping in culverts and talking to himself near the parking area. He said if we saw anyone in distress, keep distance and call it in. I said yes, of course. I'm trained. He nodded once and moved on. Before sundown, I walked down to the switchback to stretch my calves. The light went gold between the trees. The sound carried from the lot below one car door, then another, then a voice carrying too clearly for that distance. Words I didn't catch, just the pressure of them. I had one of those post-shift headaches that sits behind your left eye and waits to bloom. I took water and 2 ibuprofen and reminded myself I wasn't on call here. We ate, set the bear bag, and settled. I made a call to the hospital about an overtime form because my name had been stuck under the wrong cost center for 3 months. The hold music snapped in and out. I gave my ID number 3 times, and the call died. That will surprise no one who has ever tried to get payroll to fix a line item in spring. The first night was uneventful. A soft breeze came up the ridge. I slept the way I sleep in my call room. 1 layer down, boots within reach, head full of interrupted spaces. Sometime after midnight, I woke at a sound I could place in the hospital but not the woods. It was a soft, clean scuff close to the tent wall like rubber on grit, followed by a whisper that had syllables but no meaning. I listened hard for follow-up. Nothing. I paced my breath down and slept again. Morning brought the trail runners. The line of them moving past the switchback sounded like water slipping over wash rock. Kyle and I broke camp enough to show presence, but stayed because we'd planned 2 nights. Around 10, we met the man Wallace had described. He came up the trail with a slow, drifting step, talking with his mouth half closed. Late 20s, dirty windbreaker, eyes either too bright or not bright at all. He kept saying he was late for work. He said they were going to be mad. He said his people were doing changes on the ridge. He said he was supposed to meet them by the green rope, and he pointed past us, but there was no rope. I held my hands out and kept my body open. I told him my name. I kept my voice plain and even. I told him I had water. I asked if he wanted me to call someone. He said he couldn't talk to me because I wasn't approved. Then he said I was. Then he said we were both fine if we went back down and didn't look. He smiled with a cracked mouth. He asked if we were with the group. He said it like the group was obvious, like we had all agreed already. Kyle kept his position at my shoulder. I told the man I could walk with him to the ranger station at the lot. He said no. He said his people were here. He looked up into the trees like he expected to see a signal. I told him I wasn't trying to get him in trouble. I told him I just wanted to make sure he was safe and that everyone stayed safe. You learn the phrasing that works 90% of the time. He kept watching the trees and moved around us, up the small rise to our site. I asked him to stay on the trail. He stepped over the ring of stones with slow purpose. He said this was a working area and we were in it. He squinted at my bear line like he was reading it. He said they had work to do and we were making it slow. He said the words like he had practiced them with someone. That was where the escalation landed. It wasn't the content of what he said. It was the cadence of someone following an instruction and waiting for the next one. I glanced at Kyle. He gave me the shallow nod that means we reverse out, set a boundary, and call it in. I raised my hands again. I told the man we would move down to the switchback. I told him he could have the clearing. I said it simply, like I was adapting to his script so he could see a safe way forward. He stared like he was trying to locate a prompt in his head. We stepped back. He stepped forward. His right hand came from under the windbreaker and there was a small knife, 3 inches of steel from a folding handle. A cheap knife, but a sharp one. He wasn't swinging it. He was holding it like someone had told him to show it so we would comply. I put distance between us. Kyle did not. He said, steady but loud enough to carry, that the man should put the knife down and step back to the trail. He had one hand up and one hand at his side. Nothing about his posture was provocative. He was bigger than the man and he knew it. He bent his knees half an inch to keep his balance. The man blinked like a camera flashed in his face. We made that one wrong move. We moved as if we could decide this. The man stepped in quick at a weird angle, and the knife went forward. It was not a lunge, it was more like a shove with an edge. The blade went into Kyle's side, just above the belt line. The angle was low and up. A firefighter would call it the pocket you miss when your vest sits wrong. I had my hands on him before I knew I had moved. My body did what my body does. He sucked in air that didn't go anywhere, and I had 2 seconds to look for bright blood and pressure. There was blood. It wasn't pumping, which gave me something to hang on to. I pushed my palm against the wound and turned him so he could lower himself. I told him to breathe with me. He did. The man with the knife had an expression like someone listening to a call. The knife hung down at his thigh. He said again that this was a working area. Somewhere above us, a branch clicked, like someone stepped back fast and broke a twig. It wasn't an animal. It was deliberate weight, the kind you hear when people try not to be heard, and then they are. I didn't look up. I put my weight on my hand and told Kyle not to move. I told him to hum if he needed to exhale. He made a low sound, and that kept his diaphragm from doing anything sudden. I told the man I was going to call the ranger. I said it straight. He said we didn't need to because his people were here. He said they would take it from here, and we needed to go. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was listening again. His eyes shifted left, like someone stood just out of his peripheral. There was no one there to my eyes, but the hair on my arms lifted anyway. I pulled my phone and dialed. I gave location, and the words I had to give. My voice stayed even. Trauma surgeons are trained for that. The dispatch operator put me through to Wallace. He said he was 20 minutes out and to apply pressure and to keep space. I told him I had pressure, and we were keeping space. I didn't say anything about the noise above. I didn't have a description to give. The man backed away, eyes still moving at the air next to him. He said we should leave the gear and go to the switchback. He raised a hand with a knife just enough to make it clear that was his idea of help. I told him we would move as soon as I could stabilize a wrap. He stepped back 2 more paces, and then looked beyond the tree line like someone signaled him. He walked into the brush without looking where his feet went. Branches moved and then set. It went quiet in the way woods go quiet after weight passes. I used a torn shirt and a compression wrap from my kit. I taped where tape would stick. I kept my hand steady because that's non-negotiable. Kyle watched my face instead of the trees. I told him he was okay to breathe. He nodded without speaking. We moved in slow sections, down the slight incline, onto the trail, around the switchback. The whole time I was running a list of what would kill him in 10 minutes versus 30, and what I could do in a field. His skin stayed the right color for someone who took a shallow puncture. He kept his eyes clear. He moved air. The knife had gone in and out fast, and left trouble I could manage. At the switchback, I heard voices. Not conversation. Phonetics. Single words said with the clipped rhythm of a list. Both male and female. They came from different heights like people at different positions along the incline. Then a clatter like metal hit rock and was caught again before it rolled. I turned my head just enough to find a source. There was nothing on the trail above. The sound had the same quality as someone standing inside the trees, 1 pace off. We kept moving. The voices moved with us for a stretch, and then didn't. Wallace came up from below with another ranger. He took 1 look at the wrap and called for a transport. He asked for a quick recount, and I gave it in 1 minute. He kept his questions tight. He asked where the man went. I pointed to the brush line and said he moved into that stand. Wallace scanned that direction and said he'd sweep with the other unit after we got Kyle moving. We reached the lot. 2 more visitors stood by their cars and watched without getting in the way. Wallace told them to give space. He started a brief. I answered and handed off. I wasn't a doctor here. I was the witness who could also press down on tape while we loaded. The ambulance took Kyle with a medic in the back, and the doors shut. The sound in the woods behind us was nothing more dramatic than wind moving leaves. When the ambulance pulled out, the other ranger jogged back up the trail. I rode with a ranger to the hospital to be there at intake. They let me wash my hands and then sent me to a waiting chair. I called Kyle's sister with his permission. I called our team lead. I kept my sentences plain. A hospital at noon smells like antiseptic and sugar. I watched the doors and counted in my head because counting keeps you from thinking. Kyle was lucky. The knife had cut a shallow trajectory along tissue that bleeds but doesn't shout. He stayed overnight because no one wanted to miss a hidden vessel or a slow leak. He texted me at 2 in the morning that the jello was a crime. I told him humor could resume after anesthesia wore off. The next day, I went back with Wallace to pick up the rest of our gear. He offered to send it later. I wanted to stand where I had stood and file what I saw. The campsite looked used. That's a strange sentence to write, but it's accurate. My tent was there. My stove was not where I left it. The bear line was retied with 2 new knots I wouldn't use. Someone had shaken out the contents of my first aid kit and then reset it in the right places. My small headlamp was gone. A pocket compass I had clipped to the tarp line was gone. No raccoon opens a trauma shears pouch and then closes it. I pointed these things out to Wallace, and he made notes. He asked if the man we met would know how to retie a trucker's hitch. I said anyone could know that. He said there had been reports of what he called communal campers, people who claimed segments of trail-like territory. He shrugged just enough to show caution. He didn't add speculation. We were 10 minutes into the pack-up when a distant voice called a single name. It was a woman's voice. It sounded like someone calling a dog or a child in a park. But this was 30 yards into the trees, on a line parallel to the trail. The name didn't match anyone we knew. The voice didn't call again. Wallace stood still and rotated his head to find the bearing. He said nothing. We left with what we could carry. Back at the lot, a sedan sat crooked. Windows down, map on the passenger seat, 2 water bottles in the console, no one inside. Wallace wrote down the plate. He said he'd wait for the owner to return and check the dash for a parking slip. It had a date from that morning. He said people take longer than they mean to. He said it flat, the way you do to keep the air calm. By Monday, the missing person flyer had a name. Sarah, 26, last seen hiking the same ridge we camped on. The picture was a smiling driver's license crop. The photo lived on the bulletin board at the trailhead, and then on 100 phones. Volunteers went up. Teams went grid by grid. I helped on day 3 because I know how to work a line and not get lost. They found her off trail under a tangle where water runs after rain. Not close enough to the trail to be a slip, close enough to be carried. Her pack was not with her. Her outer layer was missing. Any gear with weight was gone. The coroner's van took her out with a small team, and Wallace closed the line. We stood back and said nothing because there was nothing to say that helped. The report came later with language I know. Displacement, removal of personal effects, no definitive trauma beyond environmental exposure. She had been moved from somewhere else. Someone had taken gear that marks a person on a trail. Wallace told me the investigation would focus on the man we met. He said the district attorney wanted to keep the scope tight. He said the evaluations would be about the aggressor's mental state. He said the word only without saying it. I asked about the voices and the movement in the brush and the knots I didn't tie. He didn't write those in a place that changes outcomes. He asked me again about the knife. I told him again where it went and how I pressed down. At home, I opened my pack and laid out everything on the floor. I logged the missing items on a notepad because that's how I marked the edges of an event. Headlamp gone. Compass gone. Stove. Displaced. Found 20 feet away from where it should be. First aid kit. Disturbed. Reset. Wraps. 1 used, 1 missing. Knife. Mine. Still sheathed. I took a picture of the layout and archived it with the time and date. It wasn't a case file, it was my record of what was and wasn't. I adjusted things after. I don't camp within earshot of a lot anymore. No matter the convenience, I don't de-escalate alone. If someone is in distress and fixated on a group, I call a ranger and I let that be the action. That's a boundary I keep now. I still hear the single words at the edge of the trees if I think long enough. It was never a chorus. It was work conversation. Short tasks handed off, gear gets moved, wounds get cleaned, things that identify a person disappear. I don't know who decided the shape of it or how they coordinate. I don't know why the man said he was late for work as if there was a clock we could not see. Kyle healed, and he jokes now about the scar and the way people do to make a border. We don't walk that ridge. We go elsewhere. We keep to places where the labor is obvious. Trail maintenance crews with vests and trucks. Orange flags on sticks, signs that tell you who swung the axe. On the day Sarah's family came to collect her car, I watched from my own truck and didn't approach. They did the slow opening of the door, the tender handling of paper that doesn't matter. Wallace stood by and didn't say more than he had to. The wind moved the leaves on the slope the same as before. It was just wind, it had to be. I wrote down the time the car left and filed it. Then I went home and put new tape in my kit and hung my headlamp on a hook above the door. I keep it there now. I don't bring it to that ridge. On the map, it was just a green gap near a kink of water west of Hot Springs, North Carolina. To me, it read like a quiet place to sleep. Flat enough for a tent. A creek with steady sound and cold pull from a spring. We carried in light because that's what the terrain allowed. I hang my food. I check my overhead limbs. I pack a small kit for cuts and heat. I'm a geologist. Reading land is habit. I told myself the remoteness was the point. Not a risk I was shrugging off. We drove a forest road until it pinched down to ruts and parked at a gate that looked like it hadn't mattered to anyone all summer. The hike-in was all roots, laurel corridors, and the kind of thin shale that stacks in plates. The clearing opened like a lid pulled back, oak on the edges, a fire ring old enough to have grown moss. The creek kept a shoulder-high wall of sound across one side. We set the tent where a breeze could run down the water and keep the bugs honest. It was July and heavy, but the cold current helped. Our first day was simple. Walk the perimeter, find the tree with a live branch strong enough for the bear hang, check where the creek cut under its own banks, and where the stones shelved just enough to catch a foot. We collected down wood, filtered water, and let the place settle. My girlfriend stretched her legs and sat with her boots off on a flat rock that held the last of the sun. We talked about nothing and watched the light bounce between leaves. I warned us about the slick rock and afternoon storms. I didn't warn us about people. That night, I slept like someone who believed a gate and 8 miles of dirt road could filter out the worst kind of company. We heard whip-poor-wills and one fox bark in the ravine. The tent made its own little room. In the morning, we made coffee and scouted the creek for a better crossing to the east bank. I took a few rock samples out of habit and didn't write anything down because this wasn't work. It felt clean to let it be just a campsite and a weekend. On the second evening, the air held and the mosquitoes stayed down. I caught a smell I couldn't place while I stirred dinner. It wasn't rot. It wasn't animal musk. It was human sweat sunk into old fabric. I assumed it was ours. A hot day will do that to gear. The breeze shifted and the smell went away. We ate, put food away, and sealed the tent. I propped my small canister of deterrent spray in the mesh pocket. The other thing that lived in the pack stayed zipped but reachable by one hand. I have rules about that. Reach without looking, safety check at sundown. Announce before you use it. I woke later and couldn't tell why. The creek sounded closer, which made no sense. Then I tried to pick the sound apart and realized I was hearing leaves clicking in a circle. One step, a pause, another step, but not around an animal path. The cadence matched, 2 or more, moving slow on purpose. The tent skin lifted and fell with the night air. A silhouette squatted outside my sidewall, where the rainflies sagged a little. The person leaned until the fabric bowed and dragged their nose along it. They sniffed the tent. It was patient and unembarrassed. I touched my girlfriend's shoulder. She woke fast and went still. We didn't talk. The figure stayed a crouch. To my left, dry leaves ticked in small arcs as someone else shifted weight. Farther out, a whisper traded with a lower voice. I couldn't make out words, only the calm pattern. My first thought was that we were the first people they'd seen here in a while. My second thought was that they knew this clearing better than I did. I decided to take the initiative, while anyone that close didn't know our positions. I slid 2 fingers into the mesh pocket. The spray can sat there with the safety tab off. I counted down in my head. I pulled the zipper all at once and threw the door out and up to break their lean. As the rainfly snapped, I put the first cloud of capsaicin into the air, above the crouch, and then swept it across the sound of breath. The person hissed and coughed and fell back. Leaves broke in a half circle. A branch rattled near the fire ring. I heard feet go different directions. Bare skin, rubber, some boots. I grabbed the pack and took the weapon out. I racked it and announced myself with a firm, plain warning. I don't like the sound it makes, but I also know what it does to a plan that relies on surprise. The movement in the trees shifted. They split, not in panic, but with purpose. One shape held behind the big white oak on the upslope edge. Another moved along the creek where the ground fell away to the water. My girlfriend put the stove and medkit in the top of her pack and tossed me the map. We started to strip camp under red light. We left what we couldn't secure in under a minute. We had 2 exits. The trail we came in on cut north before it braided into deer paths. The creek ran west along the bedrock toward a fire road I had marked with a thumb crease on the topo. The sounds in the woods made the choice for us. We took the creek corridor because the ring in the trees kept the other route choked. The bank on our side led down to a tilted slab that got wet by spray and dropped into a narrow section where the current pinched and sped up. We moved fast and low. I kept the spray in one hand, the other piece holstered but clear. Twice we heard a single stone slide on the slope above us. Not a deer. Wrong rhythm. I called out that I was armed and that we were leaving. No answer. The creek noise made our voices short. 100 yards downstream, the slate split into plates under a thin film. My girlfriend put her foot down and the whole surface let go. She caught a root and stopped. We kept moving. The next step took her onto a slab that fell into the creek like a tilted ramp. She went in up to her hips and the current yanked her to the chute. I jumped sideways to get a hand on her pack strap, but the water took us both to our knees. She spun and went through a slot where the stream bed narrowed between rock and threw anything in it forward. Her head came up once, and then the creek pulled her under an overhang where it had cut a pocket. I know that process. Summer low water grows slime you don't see. Swift flow at a constriction, turns a step into a slide, and a slide into a ride. You can't stop. I got to the lip and dropped to my chest, and reached the water hit my shoulders and shoved me along the edge. I couldn't see her, just white churn and the hollow thump of water hitting stone. I yelled her name, and heard it come back wrong off the rock. I moved downstream along the bank at a run, checking every pocket where the water widened. I left what I had to leave. Pack, stove, a sack of food. I called again. I didn't see her. The creek ran into a deeper bend, and then spread into riffles before the old road cut. I kept moving until the bank opened onto the flat made by the fire road. I flagged down a ranger before the sun came up. He came fast once he saw my hands and heard me try to explain. He put a call in for a swift water team, and then walked me back down the road toward the bend, with the kind of pace that keeps you from being stupid while you're still hot. He asked what I'd seen at camp. I told him exactly. He said they'd had trouble with people living rough in other hollows that summer. He kept the word feral out of his mouth, and I did too. He didn't need to say it. The prints at the campsite did enough. Bare feet that weren't kids, mixed with boot tread in a pattern that showed approach and pause and partial retreat. Not random, not accidental. They pulled her out at first light from a snag below the bend, where the creek slows and widens but keeps its push at midline. The current had pressed her into a tangle of branches. The medical examiner later listed drowning, and included notes about older injuries, an old fracture, and a healed scar above her knee. That part read like a record, not a cause. Bodies keep their history. It didn't change what happened that night. We went back to the clearing with the ranger. He marked the prints and took photos. He asked if anything was missing from the gear we left. A few things had been moved. Nothing was taken that I could confirm. The tent guy line had a new knot. That bothered me more than anything. It meant someone had put a hand on our shelter while we slept, or while we ran. It meant they were used to moving in that place without being seen. I filed my statement in town. I gave the location, the order of events, the times as best I could guess them. I didn't speculate. The form made it clean. Camping trip, remote area, coordinated movement around camp. A person crouched at the tent and sniffed the fabric. Deterrent spray deployed. A weapon shown and announced. Escape along the creek. Accidental death in swift water conditions. Ranger response, recovery. The line from complacency to confrontation to loss looked straight on paper. Living it had edges. I chose remoteness and told myself I knew how to read a place. I did, for rock and weather and water. I ignored the other variable because the trailhead had been empty, and the clearing looked like ours for the weekend. The men who circled the tent didn't push her into the creek, but they shaped the path we took, and when we took it, that was enough. I don't sleep in a quiet place the same way now. I still work outside. I still map thin beds and check cuts for grade. I still camp. I put more weight on my decisions about sightlines and exit routes. I add one simple rule to any site that gives me comfort. If it feels private, plan for company you don't get to see. I keep the spray in the same pocket. I run a hand across the tent wall once before I lie down to test the sag and the reach. I let the creak sound do what it does, but I don't mistake it for a wall. I can stand in that clearing in my head and find the oak, the fire ring, the tilted slab, and the bend where the water widens. The map makes it all look simple. The ground keeps the truth of it without needing my words for it. I met Riley at the service gate before sunrise. She wore the green and the badge. I had the old names for ridges, and a local's habit of cutting trail where maps only guess. The plan was simple, a 3-day loop along a river corridor that had started swallowing people. Verify a damaged shelter report. Cross a known remote sector. Exit on the fire road. Routine on paper. The kind of thing you do to prove the rumors are only noise. We crossed a shale slide and dropped into hemlock shade. Sun came up pale and slow behind the canopy. The river stayed east and low, always there when you stopped moving. Radios checked. Phone had bars. Confidence was easy. By mid-morning, a strip of damp loam took our prints clean. That's where Riley stopped and pointed. Another set paralleled ours. Barefoot or made to look that way. Big. The arch wrong. Toes squared off, not rounded. The stride was long and careful, like somebody practiced stepping quietly on a bad knee. Could be a prank, Riley said. She said it like a line. She's required to try before anything else. We side-hilled toward a knot of rhododendron that made us crawl. When we cleared it, I knew I was being watched. Back of the neck knowledge. Riley felt it too. She started logging out loud time, bearing, terrain, her voice flattening to the ranger cadence they use to keep the brain from getting hot. Across a drainage, a figure set back in the brows, upright, stock still, half turned as if posing as brush. Leaves and burlap hung off the shoulders, home-built camouflage. The posture read one thing, not passing through, watching. Forest Service, Riley called, hand up, palm open, identify yourself. No answer. No movement. A small tilt. Then the forest took them. Not up, not down. Gone. We moved. We kept our voices low and practical. That night we set a small camp on a bench above the river, where the breeze kept the bugs undecided. No fire. Radios gave normal static. My phone cached the route. We ate dry tortillas with beans, packed smellables tight, and tried to sleep. I got it in pieces between the river's constant talk and branches shifting their weight. By late morning on day 2, we reached the shelter. 3 walls, sagging roof fire pit with charcoal. The boards were carved end to end with tight repeated marks. Concentric squares with notches missing. Interrupted circles. Stacks of hash marks set in uneven columns. It didn't read as graffiti. It read as a system. The floor held a single park logo sock, a dead headlamp lens, a trail map from 2 states over, and a food wrapper for a brand that went under last year. Wrong pile for a place that sees a hiker every other blue moon. Riley took department photos. Her mouth went thin. We'll flag it, she said. We're not the first in, and somebody doesn't want us here. We ate fast. When we stood to leave, my phone died. No warning, just black. Riley's radio hissed and quit. Battery swap did nothing. My GPS puck flickered and failed. Everything dead at once. Solar flare, I said. It sounded like a joke I didn't mean to make. Interference, she said. Local. Confidence got light. We took a bearing and started for the ridge that leads to the fire road. The strange prints came back in the next soft patch of ground. Same squared toes and long stride. This time they crossed our own tracks from the morning and braided with them. They reappeared in the places you'd expect to leave a mark. Mud, seep, duff. Someone wanted us to see they could put feet where we did and choose when it counted. Twice we saw the figure again, once on the far lip of Laurel. So far you could blame the light. Once in plain view across the river on a shale bar, arm against a tree. Profile turned toward us. The burlap and brush hung wrong, like the mesh had been stitched from mismatched bits. Riley raised her hand again. Forest Service. The figure turned and broke sight. The river noise filled the hole where they had been. We pressed until the sun fell into that late light that makes the understory glow and lie about death. We stopped because moving any farther would have meant a bad choice. And bad choices out here turn big fast. Dry camp. No fire. Food 30 yards off. Listen. The river held steady. Night birds called. A fox barked once. A branch let go. Then the humming started. At first it was under the river, low, layered, a sound you feel in teeth and bone. It held a single pitch built from several voices just out of phase, like a chord tuned to make your skull vibrate. It didn't climb. It didn't search. It sat on us and waited. The hair on my arms went up. I could tell what the sound wanted by what my legs tried to do. Riley sat up and closed her eyes. Her hand found my forearm. "We're leaving," she said. "No radio. No map. No heroics. Now." Night hiking without headlamps turns you into something that negotiates with dark. We packed by touch. I left my mug, spare socks, the cook kit, the paperback I'd promised I'd finally finish. If a strap snagged, we cut it. The humming added a second voice, a breath off the first, so the sound pulsed in and out of itself. Then a third. It moved the body before it moved the mind. We stood, and the woods narrowed, not on a map but in the chest. We took the ridge because gravity tells the truth, and the fire road lives beyond it. The dark had weight, knees bent, hands low, feet reading trail grammar, leaves, root, rock, drop. Twice I went down, and once I slid on a slope of acorn caps that sounded louder than it should have. Behind us, a stick cracked the way it does when a person breaks it to say here. The humming didn't chase, it herded. We obeyed because not obeying would have been a different story. We cut a contour too tight and hit the top of a ravine. Cold air rose, wet stone smell. Riley veered left and the ground came back. My breath lost rhythm. The humming paused like someone turning a knob and returned with a high overtone that made my molars ache. The only thing I wanted in the world was a cheap headlamp and a full battery, so I kept moving. We ran until the dark thinned at the edges, and trees separated from wall into individuals. The sound eased not by ending, but by stepping back. I heard my own shirt again. I heard how loud quiet people are when they think they're quiet. We didn't stop. We didn't talk. We carried only what panic hadn't stripped. By late morning, the fire road appeared as a pale scar through saplings and goldenrod. Gravel under boots felt like proof. We followed it to a service gate and a metal sign with old bullet dimples. A Forest Service truck sat on the turnout. A tech on the tailgate watched a progress bar crawl across a laptop. We looked like we'd been chewed and returned. Riley briefed. The tech listened and glanced toward the trees like he expected them to answer. "We've had reports," he said, measured voice. "Equipment failure near that sector. Anecdotal, nothing we can reproduce." "You can if you go far enough," Riley said. He didn't disagree. "File the incident. You left gear." "Most of it," I said. "Assume it's gone. We'll post an advisory." He didn't ask about the humming. We didn't offer. Another officer stepped around the truck. Older, eyes that read trails without needing the paint on trees. "Remote sector along the river," he asked. Riley nodded. He kept his face neutral. "We'll mark it as sensitive habitat," he said. "Encourage folks to give it space. 2 jobs in 1 sentence. Protect what's there. Keep people out of what won't admit being there." We ate sealed rectangles that tasted like salt, doing its best. Riley charged her radio off the truck and watched the battery icon climb. I thumbed my phone. It woke like it had been napping and thought I was still where I'd been a day and a half ago. We drove to the station and said almost nothing. The river kept pace for a while, then dropped away. When cell towers hit, my phone lit up with everything I had missed. It felt wrong to see it all at once. In my pack, the few things we saved knocked together like junk drawer bones. After I wrote it down, The prints with squared toes and the careful weight, the figure in burlap and brush, the carved symbols in the shelter that read as rules to someone who didn't want to use words, the devices that died together for no good reason, the layered humming that made movement a requirement. There's a line between odd and organized. We crossed it in the dark. We didn't find anything that would make a nice report. We found a sector that behaves like it belongs to someone who defends it without fences. Surveillance, you notice, because you change your behavior and not because you see a lens. Pressure applied without touch. A sound that moves people in the direction you want them to go. The cause can live under physics or under rumor. Doesn't change what it made us do. We abandoned gear that doesn't matter, except the part of you that hates leaving anything. We executed an emergency night hike without light to a checkpoint we could trust. We got out. The map on my wall has a blank where the river bends into that remote sector. When people ask, I say the trails wash out in summer and not to push it. It's enough for most. Some places teach you how to walk in woods. That place taught me what it is to be seen and moved across ground you thought you chose. I keep hearing the way the humming stepped back when we hit the road. Not like a failure, but like a hand coming off your shoulder when it's done with you. I told George I only needed 2 hours. We pulled off at the Blue Ridge Parkway overlook outside Boone on a cool, clean afternoon. Early fall. The kind of day that gives you crisp air and quiet tourists. Maple leaves had just started reddening at the edges. I had it in my head to catch a sunset sequence from a ridge I'd marked in August, and then hike down to our campsite near a creek. I shoot landscapes for a living. George carried the extra batteries and a folding stool and called himself my unpaid assistant. He liked the way the light made ferns look like coin stacks. He liked the snacks more. We parked the truck under the one scraggly oak by the rail. I checked tripods and cards and told him I'd jog the side trail alone to make time. He rolled his eyes and said he'd follow in 10. We'd do our usual split, then meet at the trail switchback a mile in. We always did it. It always worked. I left him the heavier pack and took off with a single camera and one lens. This counts as delegation in my line of work. I've hired worse. The overlook path ran straight into dense green. The canopy swallowed the road noise fast. I clipped along, counting blazes on the trees. White, blue to the side. Dry leaves cracked under my boots. A woodpecker hammered somewhere off to the left. My phone showed 1 bar of service that went to nothing in 20 steps. I called the ranger station before we lost signal to tell them my truck would be at the overlook overnight. The woman took the plate number and asked me to hang the pass on the dash. I thanked her and she reminded me not to stray off marked trails because people get turned around on deer runs. I said we'd stick to white blazes. It was not a lie when I said it. I hit the ridge at the right hour. The light went thin and warm. I shot the valley, the folds, the smoke from a farmhouse out below. I got the sun just as it touched the far line and spread gold through the clear cut on the opposite slope. I remember thinking the image would sell on a calendar. I also remember I did not like how quiet it got after the sun dropped. The woodpecker quit. The birds went to sleep on a clean beat. I expected George by then. He should have been behind me, griping about the stool, pointing out a mushroom or a rotten stump. I whistled our stupid whistle. 2 short, 1 long. The trees gave it back muffled. Nothing else answered. I checked my watch, packed fast, and headed down. At the first switchback, I stopped. I heard my name. It came from the hollow to my right, not on the trail. The voice was down slope, where the laurel thickets formed dark walls. It sounded like George. He called my name in the same flat, easy tone he used when he needed the corkscrew or a hand with his bootlace. The sound was clear. It was wrong anyway. He would have come to the switchback if he was near it. He would not stand in brush and call like that. I called back. He said my name again, closer. I took a step toward it and saw no new path, only leaf duff and roots and shadow. The smell of damp came up from the ravine. I did not know why my skin between my shoulder blades went tight, but it did. I made myself wait on the blazed line. I called again that I was at the bend. I said his name and told him to come to the trail. The reply came from deeper in the thicket. Same syllables, same tone, No movement in the brush, no crack of a branch, no rattle of gear, just my name, placed low and to the right, with no real air behind it. The words sounded right, the shape of them did not. That was enough. I backed up the trail, then went down to the spot we'd planned to camp. I passed 2 hikers coming up with a dog and a day pack. I asked if they had seen a guy about my height with a stool. They hadn't. The dog sniffed and shied off into the trees, tail low. The couple moved on fast. The creek site had a clear bench where others had camped. I dropped gear, set the small tent, and put a pot on for noodles, with the conviction that warm food solves most human problems. Dry aside, it solves exactly 1.5 of them. My phone stayed dead. The sky went from blue to steel. I put a headlamp on and kept whistling. Nothing came back now. The name calling stopped when the woods went dark. I sat on the stool George left me and listened to the creek until the sound got heavy in my head. I kept the light low and aimed at my hands. The tent zipper stuck twice because the nylon swelled. The air scattered the beam in tiny bitty flecks. I laid awake for a long time thinking about topographic lines and bad falls, and a friend with a twisted ankle. I did not sleep so much as hold still and count my breath. At some point in the night, something moved through brush on the opposite bank. It made a steady weight noise and stopped. It stayed stopped for a long time. When I finally named it a deer and let go, water sounded like water again. Morning brought thin sun. I hiked up to the switchback again, and then passed it toward the ridge, whistling. The air felt colder. Squirrels did squirrel things. I found our split-off plan dumb, as soon as I said it out loud to nobody. I went back to the overlook. The truck sat where we left it. Pass on the dash. I made coffee on the tailgate. Then I did what anxious people do when they need to feel helpful. I set a course of action and stuck to it like it was a rope. I moved back into the woods and took the side spur toward an abandoned fire road. The ranger had mentioned it as a legal way around a blowdown. The spur ran straight, then pitched down through a stand of hemlocks. The ground changed from leaf to packed needles. My boots got quiet. I heard voices. They came from deep in the trees, past a cut bank where the old road had washed. There were several, low and close together. It sounded like people clearing their throats and talking under breath. No words carried, just the cadence of speech. I stopped. A smell of smoke hung flat in the cool air. Wood smoke. There was heat somewhere nearby. I left the path. I moved slow, one step at a time, placing my feet on flats and keeping the ferns from slapping back. I did not take my camera out. I held the strap in my fist so it would not catch. The sound drew me to a shallow hollow, where a windfall split the slope. The smell was stronger. I angled down behind a moss log and looked over. A group of people had set up just off the fire road. They had pieces of tarp tied to saplings for a roof, and a low black pit ringed with rock. Someone had stacked pallets and brush. Flames moved with a lazy roll. A bent metal pot hung off a branch. An old cooler sat half sunk in dirt. I saw 6 shapes at first, then more. They wore mixed clothes, camouflage, heavy coats, bare arms. One had a red knit hat, pulled down low. One had a belt with a bunch of keys. They moved like they'd learned to do it around each other, quick and flat. They kept their heads down. They passed a cup and did not laugh. On the far side of the fire, I saw the folding stool. It was George's. He had written his name on the underside in black marker. Next to it lay his pack. The strap had torn out at one seam. The foam pad was missing. I knew the scrape on the fabric where he dropped it last spring. The sight hit me in the chest and took all the air out of me. I kept my mouth closed because the body knows more about survival than my opinions do. Then, I saw him. He lay near the back where the shadow thickened under the tarp. His face was turned away. His hands were bound at the wrist with something dark. One of the group sat on an upturned crate near his feet, watching the tree line instead of the fire. The watcher shifted and said something low to the others. No one looked up. No one called out. The set of it read as ordinary for them. I did not move for several counts. The heat from the pit rolled out and caught at the back of my tongue. I looked for a blade on my belt and found only a small pocket knife. I checked for a bar on my phone and got nothing. I told myself I could make a shape and walk in like I belonged. Make a count, grab a wrist, cut, run. I inhaled, and someone in the group turned his head just enough to scan my patch of trees. His eyes crossed over my log and did not stop, and then they came back and did. He stood. He lifted a hand. The keys on the belt chimed once. I did not attack. I stood up and made a sound with my heel I could not take back, and the person with the red hat moved fast between me and the pit. Another came out of shade with a length of pipe. Another cut left, cutting off my angle down slope. The watcher by George's feet stood and stepped toward him, not away. He did not look back. I turned and ran. I ran up slope and into Laurel and over Deadfall and along the wash. I took hits on my shins and hands. Branches tore at my jacket. I went silent as best I could and put as much earth as I could between me and the voices. They came after me for a while with short calls, and then with no calls. They changed direction when I changed. I did not know how long that went on because time did not have shape anymore. The first clear thing was the road sound coming back in tiny pieces. I broke out on the Blue Ridge Parkway and did not stop. A car slowed. I flagged it down with both arms. The driver took one look at me and unlocked the doors. I told him to take me to the nearest mile marker with signal. He did. I called 911 and told the dispatcher my name, my friend's name, and the landmarks I could give. I told her I had seen a group. I told her how many I thought. I gave the details that matter out there, the bent fire road, the hemlocks, the smell of smoke. I did not tell any guesses. I kept to the facts, because facts were the only things I could hold without shaking. Law enforcement met us at a pull-off. They asked me to ride back to the overlook. I walked them to the trailhead and to the spur where I heard the voices. They told me to stay on the road. They went in with 2 more units and a K9. The dog took the lead. The handler kept the leash short. Radios clipped and popped. The ranger truck arrived. The same woman I had spoken to on the phone stepped out with a clipboard and a face that did not change when I said my friend's name again. She wrote it down and asked if he had any medical conditions. I said no. She asked what color the stool was. I said green with silver legs. She wrote it down like that mattered more than anything else did, and I hoped it did. It took hours. The sun moved from late to down. The temperature dropped fast. A trooper gave me a blanket and water that tasted like metal. The radio traffic went from fast to slow. Then it stopped. When they brought him up, the tarp they used made a hard line against the lights. They told me to stay back. I did. A deputy came over and spoke to me in a simple way. He said they had recovered my companion's body. He said there was trauma. He said it did not look like a fall. He said they would call the county. He said they would talk to me again, but not tonight. I told them what I had seen. I told them about the voices, the keys, the belt, the red hat, the stool, the binding on his wrists. I said the word people because that is what was there. They wrote it. They asked if I could identify anyone. I said no, I could not. The light from the cruisers cut the trees into clean shapes. The forest felt like a set with walls and marks. The wind ran down the hollow and brought the smoke smell up road. I slept in my truck that night with the doors locked and the seat pushed back until my knees hurt. In the morning, I drove to the station and gave my statement again. I took the camera out and showed them what I had shot before dark. It was all ridges and gold in a farmhouse. None of that was any use. They told me they would call when they had anything. They did. They called to confirm what they already told me in the pull-off. A detective said they could not say more. But my account lined up with the evidence of human predation. He did not use the words I used. He did not have to. I said thank you. He asked me not to talk to the press. I said I would not. I went back to my apartment and washed the creak off my boots. I cleaned my lenses. I put the stool in the corner. And then I put it in the closet because I could not look at it and feel my ribs loosen at the same time. I moved my projects calendar to the wall by the kitchen, where I would not see it when I woke up. I still work in the mountains. I still shoot the ridges at first light. And sometimes the shots sell. I meet clients at gas stations off 421, where the coffee is burnt and the hot case food looks older than it is. I leave a note on my dash when I'll be out late. I do not split on trails anymore. If a plan requires a split, I pick another plan. If someone calls my name from off the blazed line, I stay on the paint and wait until I see a face. If I don't, I walk away. I can live with that. I did not know why George followed the voice off trail. Maybe it sounded like me. Maybe he made the same choice I almost made. I do not try to build a reason when I don't have one. The facts are the only things that hold. We separated for a job. He got lured and taken. I saw where they held him. I ran and I made the call. The police found him later with injuries that matched what I said. That is the account. I used to mark the best overlooks with stars. I still do, but now I also mark the places where the trail narrows and the laurel leans in. I don't go there alone after noon. I keep to the paint. I stop when the birds stop all at once. Then I go home. I picked the wrong season to get healthy. Late September looks good on a calendar, but the Appalachian Mountains can switch from postcard to empty in a single day. I went up there anyway because I was tired of my divorce paperwork, my own voice, and every wall in my condo. I told my boss I needed time to think about new creative direction, which is what you say when you're an architect who hasn't drawn anything but forms for 6 months. He nodded like he was handing me a prize. I took a week and drove to a remote trail I'd scouted years ago near Mount Mitchell. The Forest Service map had a neat dotted line and little icons for campsites. The ranger station had a bulletin board with sun-faded notices and a cup of pens on a string. One pen was out of ink. I wrote my name with it anyway so the log would show I existed, even if it looked like a ghost signature. I carried a pack with just enough to feel responsible. Lightweight shelter, basic first aid, a small stove, and a yellow legal pad, because every time I say I will just think, I end up making lists about vents and clearances. The trailhead was empty. The gravel lot held my car, a sunburned orange cone tipped on its side, and a wind that swung the trees like gates. I parked, locked up, and started up, and the quiet swallowed the sound of my boots. It didn't feel cleansing. It felt like I'd muted my life by mistake. I picked a spot near a small clearing about 2 miles from the car, where the trees thinned and a line of old spruce led down toward a creek. I set up my shelter on crushed needles, pulled a string between 2 trunks for my wet socks, and marked the corners of my cooking area like I was laying out a tiny foundation. Old habits. When I sleep outside, I still draw invisible floor plans. I ate a dry dinner and took a photo of the shelter. I knew I would later rate with a punch list. No one asked for. The sun went down early. The wind combed through the branches. I lay in my bag and forced myself to think about nothing. I had one early aside left in me. That first night, I had to backtrack to find the one patch of reception I'd seen, and hold my phone high enough that a text to my sister would send, which made me look like I was testing a ceiling height I couldn't afford. I slept in fits. When I woke in the gray morning, cold enough to see my breath, I walked a slow circle to warm up. My boots showed my path from the shelter to the cook spot and out to the trees for privacy. They were the only prints I expected to see. Instead, I found other tracks, large, bare human footprints set in a rough oval around my camp. Each step had a visible arch and toes. I crouched and counted, then stopped counting because counting made it worse. They were big, they were barefoot, they circled me while I slept. I stood in the needles and looked at the trees. My pulse jumped. The prints came from the trees and went back into them. There were enough to show a slow walk, not a run. Whoever it was, he or more than one, had walked around my shelter at least twice. I wanted to explain it in one ordinary sentence and move on. I couldn't. The ground told a simple story. I packed my stove and food into my bag and considered hiking out immediately. Then I told myself it was a weird prank or some local thing I didn't get. I thought about the note at the ranger station about leaving a plan and felt like I'd underlined the wrong part of my life. I decided to move campsites, but not leave the trail. It was a stubborn idea, like changing a door swing during a build, because the initial entry feels wrong. I pushed another mile up, following blazes that looked old. I stopped in a notch of land out of the wind with a line of sight down the slope. I ate early and didn't use the stove to avoid attention. I drank cold water and managed one more aside to no one. The bare canister lid had cross-threaded, and I spent 5 minutes unjamming it like I was in a meeting with a vendor who swore the spec fit, in most cases. When night fell, it went dark and simple. The temperature dropped. The forest got louder as the wind dropped. Needles and twigs clicked. I closed the flap on my shelter and wrapped the zipper tab with a bit of cord to stop its tap. Sometime after midnight, I woke to voices. They were close and low, and not words I recognized. I lay still and listened. The voices moved around the camp. They were coordinated like a conversation split into parts. It wasn't animals. It wasn't one person. Guttural, non-human in tone. The sound had the shape of speech and none of the comfort. I reached for my headlamp and didn't turn it on. The cord at the zipper shook in my fingers. The voices stopped and started like someone giving cues. No laughter, no cough, just sound that kept meaning without language. That was my escalation. The humor shut off like a switch. My skull buzzed, and I felt the shape of my shelter as if the fabric were pressed against me. I stayed quiet. It went on for long minutes, then faded, then rose again at a different angle. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse because it felt like an answer. I waited. I slept in flickers, nothing that rested me. I woke to blue light and stood up fast with stiff legs. I checked the ground out of reflex. The new prints overlaid the old ones. Barefoot, no socks, no shoes, more of them. They had come and gone with the same unhurried bias, circling. I decided to go down. I didn't pack carefully. I stuffed and dragged and left one tent stake in the dirt. I turned for the main trail that would take me to the lot. I had the feeling of being watched, which is a sentence I hate because it relies on a feeling. But it's what I had. The trees ahead gave way to a small break in the slope. The forest went still in the way it does when wind travels away faster than sound can catch it. I moved. Near the bottom of the notch, I saw something that made me stop like my knees had a lock. To the right of the path, close to where a person might hide from rain, someone had dug a hole. It wasn't deep enough to be a ditch, and wasn't the shape of a random animal scrape. It was a deliberately sized excavation, centered and neat enough to show a plan. Inside were discarded personal items, a torn plastic grocery bag, a cracked lighter, a corner of what looked like a wallet photo softened to mush, and a fork with a taped handle. The hole had clean edges. The soil stood up straight on each side like the start of a job. My job brain supplied the word footings, and I felt my mouth go dry. They had made that hole near where I slept. For what? I didn't know. It was an explicit act of threat, whether it made sense to anyone but me. They had thrown things into it, markers of people, of food, of heat, of memory, and left it for me to see. I looked at the trees again, and my body made the decision my head had been avoiding. I ran. I ran on the trail because cutting through the trees would get me turned around faster than I wanted to admit. I kept my pack on. The straps dug into my shoulders, and my breath got loud in my ears. And when I glanced back down the slope, I saw movement. Multiple figures moved through the trees below me. They did not run on the trail. They moved fast, with an unnaturally smooth, loping gait, like distance had been shortened for them. I saw bare arms or legs between trunks, but no shirts, no jackets, nothing to break outline. They covered space faster than I could, with less effort than I was using. I pushed up past a downed log, and thought, keep to the open parts. Avoid blind turns. The trail bent, so I pushed off and cut a shallow diagonal to hold sight. One of them stepped into view behind me, between two furses. He stood and watched me instead of advancing. I saw a narrow chest and long shoulders, a head cocked like listening. Then he retreated, and the movement resumed, skirting rather than closing. They were hurting me without touching me. I wanted to stop and get my bearings. I didn't. I pushed until my calves burned and my hands shook. The trail markers looked older the farther down I went, which made no sense. The wind died completely. The forest sound condensed to my breath, and the crush of needles under my boots. When I looked back again, I saw two figures now to my right, keeping distance, moving with the same look-at-me economy. They never tripped. They never called out. I tried to plan a turn like I would plan a corridor, 2 steps ahead and an exit. I knew the lot was still a mile down. I thought, make noise for a person. I yelled my name and the word help. The word felt small in the trees. I yelled again, and then the trail rounded a low shoulder and opened into a corridor of thin trunks, where sunlight had cut through. I saw a flash of orange near the path. My brain took a second to recognize the shape. A truck sat half into the corridor with the Forest Service logo on the door. A ranger stood beside it with a radio in his hand. He had a hat, a chest badge, and the relaxed stance of someone waiting for a response. I shouted and waved my arms and didn't stop running, because stopping felt like inviting hands on my back. He saw me and stepped forward, one hand up in a universal calm down. He said my name because I had written it in the board, and he said to come ahead slow so I didn't slip. I didn't slow until I reached the gravel of the road cut, where I slid and grabbed the side mirror of the truck. The ranger put a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady, and asked me what was wrong. I told him about the prints and the voices and the hole, because that was what I had. He didn't smile or tell me I had imagined it. He asked me to point. I turned toward the trees we'd come through and raised my hand to show him where the figures had moved. They stood at the edge of the forest. 3, then 4, each half shadow in the line where trees started again. They were still as if a line had been drawn and they would not cross it. Bare legs, pale shoulders, hair to the jaw or longer, no shoes, no shirts. I couldn't see faces, only the fact of their bodies and the lack of motion. We all stood there, and for a fraction of a second it felt like a room no one wanted to step into. Then the ranger said, quietly but in a normal voice, to get into the truck. I got in, he closed the door and walked around. He did not run. He got in the driver's side and started the engine. He spoke into the radio and gave codes I didn't know. He pulled forward in a slow, deliberate turn, the tires grinding the gravel. Then we moved down the road away from the trailhead. He checked the mirror and didn't comment. I watched the tree line until it fell away. At the station there was fluorescent light and a coffee pot that looked both clean and veteran. A second ranger sat at a desk and listened as I recited the same facts again. They told me there had been reports of unpermitted camps deeper in the backcountry, and sometimes groups drifted across old trails. They did not say who. They did not say why. They asked me to write what I had seen. I wrote in block letters because my hands shook less that way. One of them drove me back to my car. I got in and turned the key and waited for nothing at all to happen. That could be mistaken for a sign. I drove down into town where there were cars and people, and a diner with a burnt coffee smell that made me feel like part of a system again. I ate eggs I did not taste and sat near the door. I didn't go home right away. I walked to the small bridge over the river that cuts below Burnsville and leaned on the rail and watched water break around a rock. I tried to think of the generous version of what had happened and failed. I did not know why they had dug the hole, why they had spoken the way they did, why they had moved without sound and then stopped at the edge when the truck appeared. I kept seeing their feet and the way they stood still when I reached the road. I still design houses. I sit at my desk and stand when I need to stretch and stack erasers in neat lines. I go outside in friendly places. I run on sidewalks. I take my calls in rooms with doors that close and locks that catch. When light fades, I feel a line draw itself across a landscape I can't name. Most nights I sleep. Sometimes I wake and listen for voices I won't understand. I think of the hole they dug and what they left in it, and the way the ranger's hand closed warm and solid on my shoulder when I reached the truck. I tell myself I got out. I tell myself that's the end of it. But every time I park on a quiet street or walk past an alley or step into a stairwell, I know the shape of being circled, and I know the empty pause before motion starts again. I know because I ran up a mountain to be alone and found out I wasn't, and I escaped by chance at morning, and the line those people would not cross lives with me now. I went into the mountains alone after Jake bailed. I told myself I wanted the quiet. I had a ridge trail mapped to a dispersed site I'd marked weeks earlier. It was October. The hardwoods were bare and the air had a bite to it. Sky opened clean between the ridges. I set up behind a lichen-slick boulder. Wind slid through camp in a steady line. I wrote a few notes by headlamp and listened to the ordinary sounds wind makes in trees. The quiet changed. It wasn't just that crickets stopped. The forest closed up. I looked for a reason. Branch shift, owl, something regular. A sound rose instead, not language, but shaped like it. It went up and down, smooth and deliberate. It came from the ravine, then above me, then across the creek. Every time I thought I'd fixed its location, it moved. I told myself it was a fox call bouncing in cold air. I zipped the tent and waited it out. The sound thinned and finally lost its shape near midnight. By morning, I pushed east. The trail climbed through hemlock that made a dark hallway. A short rise later, I saw it. A circle of stones just off the path where the ground leveled. It wasn't big. 13 stones, each knee-high. Someone had etched symbols into a few of them. Angles and side angles, a circle with a crossbar, one that looked like a closed eye. The marks weren't fresh, but they hadn't gone soft with moss either. I touched one. The stone held a warmer temperature than the air. I took 2 photos. I told myself I'd log the coordinates at camp. The quiet pressed in again. A crow called once, and the sound sat there without echo. I moved on. By afternoon, the wind shifted and the sky went flat and metallic. I changed my plan and headed toward an old fire road to camp, closer to it. That was when I saw the structure. At first it read as hillside, then a collapsed barn. Then it resolved into a one-room shack set into the slope. Stone footings, roof patched with metal sheets, narrow windows without glass. The door hung crooked, tied shut with sun-faded nylon rope. Initials marked the lintel in layers. The clearing around it was wrong. No saplings, no mushrooms, just hard earth and a ring of dead fern. I circled once and kept going. My breathing sounded loud. I pitched near the roadbed. I ate, cleaned up, checked my map. The sound came back. 3 notes up, a pause, then a long slide down. It lifted the hair on my forearms. It had the feel of something repeating a piece it knew, not making it new. I slept in broken stretches. Sitting up in my bag, I counted my pulse and stopped when I realized that made me more aware of it. I decided to leave early. The trail back looked right and wrong at the same time. Blaze marks showed up at bad intervals. The creek sounded farther away than it should have. I kept a steady pace and checked the map again. That was when a man stepped out from behind a tulip poplar. He was lean in a way that could mean hard living or age. He wore layers of jackets that didn't match and had gray stubble. His eyes didn't rest on one place for long. He could have been 50 or 80. He had the look of someone who had been outside for a very long time and was fine with it. He said I shouldn't be there. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like telling time. I offered water or a bar. He shook his head. Not at me, at the space around us. He told me to leave that day. He told me to leave right then. His gaze hit my pack like he recognized it or knew what a pack like that meant. He said one more thing, quiet enough that I almost missed it. It doesn't like to be seen. I asked what he meant. He said the place, or the thing that was left of it. He pointed uphill with 3 knuckles raised. He said there was a way the old ones marked. Stones. Someone kept it. The word kept sat in my head. I asked his name. He said Samuel. Then he looked like he regretted saying it. He told me to go. He said it would call if I stayed. I went. I followed the blaze back toward the road. The trail threaded me past the structure anyway. I hadn't meant to go near it. The door was open. The rope lay loose on the ground like it had been dropped. I stood in the doorway and smelled damp leaves and iron. The floor was hard-packed earth. Shelves ran along one wall. A table showed old burn marks. On the far side, a hanging wool blanket hid a narrow opening into the hill. I put my light on and looked in. The chamber was low. I had to hunch. The walls were tamped clay. Personal things sat on the dirt. Rusted tins. A boot without its sole. A belt buckle. Photographs were nailed to the wall. The nails wept orange. There were bones. I am not going to describe them. There were more than one person's. They were scattered and mixed, not arranged. A leather-bound book lay near them. It was swollen with damp. The first page had initials that matched my last name. It took a long breath for me to connect it. My mother's side had a family story about a great uncle who went missing in the mountains in the 40s. It was the kind of story used to warn kids not to wander. My grandmother cried when she tried to say his name, so nobody did. The first entry in the journal used it, Samuel. I sat on my heels and read what I could. The ink held where the pages had been protected. The handwriting changed a little across the months. He wrote that he had been a survey hand for a logging outfit and stayed after the job ended to trap and keep a garden in a bend of the ridge. He noted the circle of stones and said it had been there longer than anyone knew. He wrote about a call on some nights that sounded like a group under the ground, learning a single note. He said locals refused to cross that saddle and would not say the name of the place. When entries turned later, the lines got rough. He wrote that people not from town came at the ends of months and tended the circle in an old fashion. He wrote that he tried to move a stone once and woke on the ground with dirt in his teeth and the clear impression of hands on his back. He wrote that he met a man with his name who told him to leave. The last page I could read said the quiet wasn't the absence of sound. It said the sound didn't need people anymore. Air shifted behind me. Not a step. The room dimmed as if the dirt pulled in the light. The call began from inside that small space. It was close. It had no distance and no source. Every hair lifted along my neck and arms. It wasn't loud. It didn't ask for anything. It continued. I put the journal back exactly where I found it. I backed out. In the main room, a draft slid past me from the open door. It was clean and sharp. The rope on the floor moved a few inches. Outside, the forest had that closed quiet again. No wind moved the bare limbs. The creak sound was gone. Even my steps on leaves came out flat, like I was walking on padding. I walked and did not mark turns. I told myself I could triangulate later if I needed to. I focused on forward. Near the hemlock stand, I saw the man again. Samuel stood behind the same tulip poplar with his hands inside his sleeves. He didn't step out. He shook his head once. The look read like a small forgiveness for the part of me that had gone in anyway. He lifted his chin toward the fire road. I ran. I kept going until the ordinary forest came back in layers. A woodpecker. The far sound of a jet. My own footsteps sounding like footsteps again. I bent over a log and dry heaved. The sky was clear and brittle. I walked to the trailhead and got in my car. I drove. I did not look in the rear view. I pulled off at a gas station and stood in front of the coolers, because the hum sounded like company. At home, I pulled the photos. The stone circle showed up twice. In the first, the symbols were as I had seen them. In the second, taken seconds later from a step to the left, one stone showed a different mark. The closed eye had become a wheel with spokes. When I zoomed in, the pixels broke apart before the lines did. I checked county archives online for my last name. I found a death notice with no body. It listed him as presumed. The date was vague. A scanned margin note said the mother declined to speak and that her hands were shaking. I haven't gone back. The quiet in my apartment is normal again. It has edges I can hear. When I wake at night, I listen for that other quiet. It hasn't visited here. If it did, I would leave my building and walk until I heard traffic. If you go out there, don't chase a story because a place looks arranged for you. If a man steps out of the trees with winter in his hair and tells you to go, go. Some places remember what was done to them, and the remembering makes a shape you don't need to see. Mike called it the Hammer Road, though on the topo it wasn't labeled anything at all. Just a pale seam curling up from the creek into shaded contours. Follow the red blazes, he'd said, voice low like he was telling a fishing spot secret. Not the paint, the cloth. They're different. You'll see. That was all. No mileage, no coordinates. Just a county name and a warning laugh. Don't go if you want company. You won't find any. I went because September is when the mountains finally start to breathe again. The flies fall quiet, the days sharpen. I had 3 days free and a pack paired to hunger. I parked at the old gate and slid under, stepping into wet grass that licked my shins. Past the first culvert where the creek rolled like a rumor in the dark. I looked for trail paint and found none. But then I noticed red faded strips of flannel, tied at odd intervals to laurel and saplings, frayed edges trembling whenever wind curled through. Cloth, not paint. Mike's voice echoed, different. I followed them along the creek as it ran iron bright and peppery with shale. The old roadbed heaved with old frost heaves and buried rock. Somewhere a woodpecker tapped in the drier pines above the ridge. I walked in long stretches without thinking much, which was the goal. My boots found their rhythm. My brain idled. Peace is a motion, not an arrival. I've learned that greasing miles calms the gears inside. The first sound came faint, like a clock wrapped in blankets. A soft strike, then a gap, then again. Regular, not the woodpecker. It rode the water's constant hush until my ears trained to it, and then I couldn't unhear it. I stopped where the creek widened into a glassy scarf. Tap, tap, tap. The hair went up on my arms. It could have been a machine left on, some old pump, or it could have been kids, if kids still came this far. The red cloth markers led on. They grew less frequent the farther I went. At the second culvert, a big rusted pipe choking with silt. The rhythm grew louder. It was like walking toward a metronome hidden in the hills. Tap, tap, tap. I found myself matching it, then resenting it, the way you resent a stranger stepping in front of your pace. Toward dusk, the old road lurched up and away from the creek, climbing over a rubble slope. A stand of tulip poplars swallowed the light. The cloth markers turned to cords. Strips of shirt sleeves knotted tighter, newer red. I ducked through them like prayer flags gone wrong, and stepped into a clearing where the logging road simply ended against a collapsed structure. Half barn, half chapel, all rot. 3 walls stood. The 4th had sloughed off into the ferns. The roof dipped like a tired animal's back. A porch sagged. The regular tapping was louder here, insistent as though coming from the floorboards. I called out in a casual voice I didn't feel. Hello? The sound didn't change. Inside smelled like mouse nests and wet hymnals, light knifed in through board seams. In the far corner on a rough platform sat a pump organ, cracked walnut case carved with vines, keys yellowed like old teeth. The front panel had been removed, exposing reeds and bellows like lungs. A length of cord ran from the organ's pedal, looped over a beam, and attached to a pine sapling outside, bending it under tension. Wind worried the sapling, and every gust tugged the pedal down just enough to set a mallet striking somewhere inside the cabinet. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't playing notes, just that hammer, just a mechanic persistence. The sound made the place feel awake, though there was no hand at it. That was somehow worse than if there had been. I reached to still the cord. Don't, someone said behind me. I spun. A man stood in the doorway, lean and long, with hair chopped in clumps like he'd done it with a pocket knife. His eyes were glassy bright, rims raw. He wore a denim shirt buttoned wrong, and a smile that didn't fit his face. He took a step in without lifting his feet all the way. Toe scrape, heel drop, tap, tap, tap went the organ, and his jaw tightened like he wanted it to hush, and couldn't bear it to hush. Roads closed, he said. You must have missed the sign. There was no sign, I said, just cloth. His smile widened, showing a chipped front tooth. Cloth is clearer to those who can read it. He moved faster than his posture promised. One moment he was 2 strides away. The next he was inside my reach with a jagged length of lathe in his hand, swinging low. I got my pack half off, turned it into the blow. It took the brunt, but the sting bled through. I shoved with the same muscle memory I used to push off a switchback. Low hips, shoulders square, and we both tangled into the organ's platform. The cord jerked. The sapling outside rebounded. The hammer inside the cabinet rattled in a heartbeat stutter. He came up with the lathe again, and I hit him with my elbow, solid in the cheek, bone on bone. He grunted, licked blood. Not for you, he hissed. Not today, you came wrong. I don't like fighting. That's why I walk. But there's a kind of steadiness that descends when you know the math of a situation has only one solution. He swung. I caught his wrist. We pitched against the organ so hard the case cracked with a complaint like a bent board snapping free. His head snapped forward, striking the edge. He went loose in my hands, knees buckling. The lathe clattered. The tapping carried on. I stepped back, chest banging, pack half off one shoulder. My world narrowed to the doorway to flight until a whisper came from the shadows under the platform. Don't go. A hand slid out, small, ash-smeared, trembling. Then a face. A woman, my age or younger. eyes wide with the kind of focus you see in people who've rationed their fear into day-long portions. She crawled out, favoring one leg. Her left ankle was swollen over her boot collar and laced with dried blood. A leather cord hung at her throat, empty, whatever had been on it gone. "Please," she said, "there are more. He's not the worst of it." She stood up with the quiet strength of someone who has been moving hurt for a while. "Lena," she said, before I could ask. Her voice was hoarse. "They call themselves keepers. You found their bell." She nodded at the organ. "They keep time." Outside, somewhere down the overgrown road, voices, several men, the syllables smeared by distance and the creak's fussing, but real enough to rearrange my priorities. Lena's eyes pinned me, assessing if I'd bolt and leave her or not. I saw Mike's stupid grin in my head and felt a clean, cold anger slide into place. "Can you walk?" I asked. "I can go downhill," she said. "Up's bad." "We're going down," I said, and slung my pack fully on. I looped an arm under her shoulders. The crazed man groaned where he lay, a smear of blood bright against the organ's carved vines. We slipped out the broken wall into ferns, the sapling still strained in its loop. I paused just long enough to reach up and pull the cord free. The organ's hammer fell silent. The sudden absence of tapping cleaved the world open. The creak sound rushed in. A bird called, shocked. Lena sucked in a breath like she'd been underwater. We moved along the edge of the clearing, down to where the old road resumed. Only it wasn't a road now, but a suggestion traced by truck ruts, and the blackened circles of dead campfires. There were shapes back in the trees, frames, racks, something like a stone ring. Lena didn't look. She fixed her eyes on my shoulder, using it to time her steps. "They keep time," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "They say the world's out of step. The hammer calls us back." "What were you to them?" I asked, to keep her talking and therefore upright. "A thing to listen," she said. "A thing to carry water. A thing to break for a lesson." She swallowed. "They have a place they call the center. The bell feeds it." The red cloth markers mocked us now, pointing back the way I'd come, but voices swelled behind too close to risk the obvious path. I cut into Laurel, using the slope's logic. Every ridgeline leads to a draw. Every draw leads to water. If we hit the creek, I could follow it out by feel. The Laurel clawed my arms. Lena bit her lip, breath hissing, but she didn't complain. We dropped until the ground underfoot turned from leaf duff to rock, slick with seep. "Names," I said. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "Names stick to things." "Then don't stick mine," I said. "We're just moving." She almost smiled. "Almost. We're just moving," she echoed. We hit the creek at a bend where the bank undercut was high enough to hide us if we crouched. I led Lena down into the water. It was cold enough to ache my bones. The current tongued my shins, tried to pry my boots off. We moved like herons, careful and long-stepped, using the shadows of overhanging rhododendron as a curtain. Voices came and went above. Then timber cracked under someone's boot, and a stone splashed upstream. The creek kept counsel. We went that way until the light thinned, and the blue smell of evening settled in. I found a gravel bar and a down hemlock that made a screen. We hunkered there. I gave Lena the only dry socks I had left and a foil blanket. She shook with a delayed violence that wasn't just cold, then steadied. I kept my boots on because taking them off would break me. "Who sent you up there?" she asked finally, eyes on the last light holding in the poplar crowns. "A relative," I said. "He likes strange shortcuts." She nodded like that, matched the world she knew. "They have more than one bell," she said. "The organ is for the big things. There are smaller ones, bones strung on lines, pipes and trees. I think the sound is to keep them brave." "Brave for what?" "For doing what they do when the world is quiet enough that nobody stops them." She tilted her head, listening to something inside herself. "They'll come in the morning. They don't like moving at night. They say the night is for the hammer, and the day is for hands." I slept in increments. Every small sound a new inventory of threats. An owl dropped through with soft wings. Something barked and ran. Once, in the gray hour, A low hum seeped through the trees. The organ again, or my brain manufacturing dread. I couldn't tell. No uncanny. Just people and old wood and water. At first light we moved. Lena's ankle had ballooned, but stiffened enough to be a peg. I made a walking stick for her and took her pack. She had one small with nothing in it, but a half-empty jar of salve and a folded scrap of paper I didn't read. We cut the red cloth markers when we found them, and tied them to new branches that pointed toward what I guessed was a steeper, but shorter route to the gate. If the keeper's red cloth let them read wrong. The day heated. A hawk circled over a sun-struck clearing. My shirt stuck to my back. We made the second culvert by late morning. Past it, a low roll of voices. Two men stood where the road necked between boulders. Arms hung easy, faces open enough that if you didn't know better, you'd mistake them for hikers. One lifted a hand. Morning. I felt Lena lean closer. They smile when they decide something, she said softly. The boulders left no other path. I shifted our angle, enough to buy seconds. Morning, I said, matching their casual. You came up? The shorter one asked. He had clay under his nails. Turned around, I said. Trail's gone bad. Y'all should have asked. The taller one said. We could show you the good ways, safer. Water's the good way, I said, and had Lena step off the road toward the creek. The shorter one moved to block, smile still pinned on. It was a small move, almost polite, the kind that counts on you to be polite back. I wasn't. I shoved him hard in the chest with the heel of my hand and felt the surprise in his balance. We tumbled him into the ditch grown thick with jewelweed. The taller one stepped, telegraphing a grab, and I broke a stick across his forearm before his hand closed. His smile fell off his face like a leaf, and the anger underneath had no voice, just speed. It wasn't clean. His shoulder hit my ribs. I heard Lena gasp, and the sound did more for my strength than any training ever could. I got low, found a hip, twisted, motion not meaning. We thudded into the culvert's rim. My boot slipped on wet iron. He came down awkward and yelped. A thin jet of blood ran from his elbow crease. The shorter one scrambled out of the ditch with jewelweed stuck to his shirt like decals. We ran, not gracefully, not heroically, just ran. The last half mile stretched like rubber, each step slackened by fear that the next would snag on a root and end the math. And then the gate, the stupid gate. I shoved Lena under first, then flattened myself and hauled through. A white pickup rolled slow on the county road, driver craning. I stood tall, waved both arms, made my face something plain. Need. The truck braked. The driver rolled down his window and took us in with a glance that said he had seen things before, and filed them where practical men file. Get in, he said. You can tell me or not tell me, but you're getting in. We did. The truck smelled like dog and diesel. Lena held my hand hard enough to grind the bones. As we pulled away, I looked back. In the green tunnel of the logging road, red cloth trembled on branches, catching a small breeze I couldn't feel. Far back in the trees where the light turned moss-colored, I thought I saw 3 figures step into the road and stop, like deer do at the edge of a pasture, looking out at the world that wasn't theirs. The driver coughed, shifted, and the mountains opened in front of us. The tapping, if there was any, couldn't reach this far. I later called Mike and told him what his cloth markers led to. He went quiet a long time. Didn't know, he said at last. Thought it was just old logging boys telling ghost tales. Not ghosts, I said. People, which is worse. I never reported it the way you're supposed to. Because the part of me that walks to find peace hates forms, hates bringing the law into places where the law barely fits. But I called a ranger I trust, and I told him there were structures up there, and men with smiles that meant things. He said he'd go. He said the mountains were full of centers that weren't on maps. Lena stayed 2 nights at my place, sleeping on my couch like she was harvesting a season of rest in 48 hours. On the second morning, she left before dawn with my stove and my spare pack and the scrap of paper I still hadn't read. She put her hand on my shoulder at the door, the way she had used it to steady herself on the downhill. Keep moving, she said. You too, I said. We didn't exchange numbers. Names stick to things. Some things I decided to leave unlabeled, the way the topo leaves the Hammer Road unnamed. Just a pale seam insisting downhill toward water, toward the long repetitive work of getting out. I took the job because valleys like that don't exist on maps anymore, not the good ones. My agent said I needed something clean and quiet to reset my portfolio after a year of missed deadlines and stale assignments. He meant a winter elk set, clean lines, white air, some hoof prints cutting the frost. He did not mean what I found. I planned 5 days, a deliberate venture. Hike in, set camp, shoot dawn light, hike out. The valley sits off a service road west of Hot Springs, North Carolina, a high bowl in the Appalachian backcountry that eats radio. The rangers mark the road as gated and seasonally closed. Their map shows contour lines and nothing else. I liked that. Clean slate. I also liked that my truck would hide behind the gate, which meant fewer people asking about permits I didn't have. One aside, the only thing worse than a ticket is a ranger explaining the correct permit link while you nod like a student. I'm a wildlife photographer. I sell stills to magazines that want teeth and steam, or hooves and fog. Simple stuff that needs a steady hand and enough spine to sit dead silent for hours. My defining trait is the part of me that gets quiet when I raise a lens. Noise falls away. Frames line up. It is a useful thing to have, and it is the thing that hurt me. Day 1 felt normal. Early winter at elevation means the ground holds yesterday's ice and today's thaw. The sun rode low. Clouds rubbed the ridges and let go of a few dustings around noon. The valley had a narrow throat pines, a creek, a flat spot for the tent. I hung food, ran guy lines, and paced out sight lines. I set a workflow: camp, creek, elk, sign, light study, stove. I logged my location in a text to my brother while I still had a bar. He never texts back on time. Second aside, if you want someone to check in on you, don't pick a man who forgets his own dentist appointments and writes the reminder on the wrong month. At the creek I found prints. Not elk. Longer. Human length, yes, but wrong in 2 ways. Toes were wide and flat. The ball was narrow. The stride was off, as if the left foot tested the ground in a shallow arc before deciding. I crouched and took frames. The snow-crusted mud held the edges clean. The heel depth was inconsistent, like the body weight settled late. I didn't know why. They led up valley, away from my camp. I shot a series for scale. Boot beside print. Glove beside print. A tight shot on the toe spread and the silt pushed up between the pads. The light was good. The habit you build in this line of work is to measure before you decide. I followed for 100 yards and stopped. The valley opened. The print line crossed open ground and broke into brush on the far side. The pace changed there, shorter, set close, as if whoever made them changed the way they moved. I marked a dead pine snag with a strip of orange flag from my kit. I don't love flagging leaves trash if you forget, but I wanted a clean return path. I went back to camp, ate, and made a fire the size of a pizza pan. The trees shook off tiny loads of ice in little sighs. Night hit hard and fast. The cold took my breath in the first hour, and then settled. I slept light. On day 2, the prints returned. Not where I had followed them. Fresh ones skirted my camp, stayed 20 feet out, and ran parallel to the creek. The toe spread was the same. The arc step was the same. The stride was a little longer. I raised the camera and my hands shook, not fear. Cold. I told myself that, and it was true then. I took pictures and stopped. The game changed in that one small observation. It's one thing to find sign in a wide valley hundreds of yards off. It's another to see the line near your tent, looped once as if sampling. That was my first confirmed escalation. From that point on, I kept my humor in my pocket and let the noise drop out. I picked a rule and said it out loud to hear it. No following close, no pushing. I walked up valley again in daylight. On the path I marked and on the far side of the opening, I found a village. Village is the best word I have. Huts made from saplings bent to meet at the ridgeline. Roofs dressed in bark slabs and grass mats frozen in sheets. A ring of posts around the largest shelter. Ropes run between posts. Bundles hung from those ropes. knotted and wrapped in cloth and leather. Wind knocked one bundle and it turned enough to show what it was without any guesswork. A human shin, stripped to bone. A line of small skulls sat along a beam in a pattern I could not pretend was random. The skulls were adult. Teeth were worn. All of it was arranged. The ground under the ropes was swept. I took one photo, then a second, then 3 fast ones, without looking through the viewfinder to bracket exposure, because my hands had started to shake hard enough to throw focus. I listened. No voices. No engine. A sound like a breath under the huts. Wind moving through dry grass pinned under bark. I set my camera for silent mode and shot the ring from different angles, staying outside the rope's shadow. I kept a tree between me and the huts when I moved. I stayed long lens. No wide frames. I kept my jacket zipped to keep the fabric from catching. I was not brave. I was working. I did not touch a thing. I did not cross a rope line or step where the ground had been swept. I documented what any investigator would see, and left. My chest hurt and I realized I had been holding my breath in short bursts. I came down the valley and found new prints overlaying my ribbon, as if someone had stood at my marker and watched. The snow there had a scuff as if a stick had been dragged. I broke camp fast. I cut the guy lines instead of untying knots. The sun sat past noon. Clouds lowered. The trees got quiet. I packed the camera bodies and cards into the dry bag and put that bag in my pack instead of leaving it on top. I moved. I heard them first at the creek crossing, 2 steps where mine had been 1. A second line that cut closer on my left. I never saw faces that afternoon. I saw legs twice in my peripheral vision, and once a hand on a root. I did not lift my lens. I put my head down and I walked. The trail pinched at the boulders. I took the boulders slow and kept my hands on wet rock and counted steps out loud to fetch my breath back. I reached the gate at dusk and saw boot tracks on the outside road. Not mine. 3 pairs. Heavy. Regular. Government issue, I thought, and then pushed that thought away because it did not help anything for a road that my map called closed. I slept in the truck at a motel off US 25, near the interstate. The room smelled like disinfectant and carpet glue. My fingers twitched in sleep like they were still closing a shutter. I sat up at 3 a.m. and checked the cards, then sealed them again. I left at dawn without breakfast and drove to a print shop in Asheville that I use when I need proofs before I pitch. I like the owner. He has a voice that anchors a room. He waved me in and told me to come back in an hour. I walked to a coffee shop and stared at a wall, and then came back to blank faces and 2 men at the counter, who looked at me like I had arrived late to something they had started without me. One wore a green jacket with a patch he didn't need to show. I said my name. He said his. He used US before the rest. He asked where I had been. I told him the national park and named the ridge. He asked me to step into the back. The print owner looked down and rubbed his thumb on the edge of a paper that wasn't there. They were professional. They said they received a call about a trespass onto a closed study area. I said I had seen no signs that said study area, just the seasonal gate. They said I had passed a posted closure past the boulders. I said I had not. The taller one asked if I was certain. He set a form on the table and a pen beside it. The form was a receipt for seized media and devices, listed as critical evidence. He asked me to unlock my camera bodies and hand over my cards. He said I could keep the empty cameras. He said this would be quick. He said the material needed to go to a field office for review, and that I could expect a call. He wrote a phone number on the corner of the form and slid it across. The pen touched my fingers. I signed because I thought I was playing a short game. Sign, comply, call later, get my work back, argue about permits with a person in an office instead of 2 men who watched my hands while I breathed. They took the cards. They took the print proofs that had come off the big machine while we talked. The owner kept his eyes at the middle distance. He did not argue. They left with a thank you for your cooperation that had no temperature. I called the number 2 hours later, and a recorded voice said the voicemail box was not set up. I called the park office and the woman who answered said there was no field office matching that number, and asked for my name twice like she was writing with a blunt pencil. She said she would look into it and call me back. She did not. I drove home and found my email had a note from a magazine I'd been pitching for years. It said my portfolio raised standards concerns after recent online reports. I searched my name and found a smear post on a forum that photographers avoid because it eats time and life. The post said I staged animal shots with purchased remains and harassed hikers. It said I had been warned about this before. The replies said the industry needed to clean house. Anonymous accounts posted old frames of mine and circled random elements with red annotations about composite artifacts. There were none, but circles look like facts if you move fast and want them to. A week later, a letter came from an organization with an acronym that looked official but had no street address. It said my behavior in a protected area had resulted in revocation for cause of future independent study permits in several regions. I had never held any of those permits. My agent called and said we needed to shelve my winter project and lean into weddings for a quarter to let things cool. I said no. He said he understood and paused long enough to say he needed to protect the rest of his list. I didn't sleep. When I did, I woke with the smell of bark mats in my nose and a cold knot under the ribs where you keep breath for later. The phone rang at odd hours with nothing on the line, and then a click. My brother texted 3 days late asking if I made it out, and I typed yes and erased it, and typed yes again and hit send. I went back to the valley once more on day 5. I know what I wrote above. No pushing, no following close. I broke the rule because everything else was already broken, and I needed a sentence I could own that said I tried to fix any part of it. I left before sunup and parked at the same gate. There were ranger trucks this time, 2, parked sideways. A third rolled in as I zipped my coat. A man in a hat stepped out and asked my name. I told him. He said the area was closed for a winter hazard assessment and that I needed to leave at once. He did not write a ticket. He did not ask what I was there to do. He stood where the road narrowed and looked over my shoulder like he was counting trees. I moved to a little town in eastern Tennessee 2 months later because the job board started to dry up and the landlord hinted, and the grocery store began to feel like a place where I was on display. Forced displacement reads clean on a line. In life, it is trips with soft boxes you sell cheap, and a storage unit you promise to empty next week, and a dog-eared road atlas because your phone plan is a mess. I took odd jobs and sold a pair of lenses I had planned to. Will to a nephew I don't have. I had coffee on a porch that faces nothing, and let the light run across bare hills. I still carry my camera. I still stop for elk prints. The paranoia is practical now. I sit with my back to walls in public places. I mark exits with a glance and lock doors twice without thinking. I keep my cards on my person until I copy them, and then I still keep them on me. A plain car has passed my house and slowed 4 times this month. The driver never turns to look. It might be a neighbor, it might be nothing. I write that. I put it on the page in clean words. I don't know why the car slowed. I know what happened in that valley. I know what I saw and what I shot. I know who took those images and called them evidence. I know who I was before and who I am now. I can list the roles. Protagonist. Me. A professional wildlife photographer. Day hikers. I met 2 on the road coming out on day 2. Hats tight, faces closed, eyes on the ground, who stepped off the shoulder to let me pass without a word. Feral human group. I did not see bodies in motion, but I saw their huts, their rope lines, and their ritual arrangements of remains. Park rangers and federal agents. I heard their boots, I saw their trucks, I signed their form. At midday on the last day I was in that park, the light went hard and white against the ridgeline, and then softened as a bank of gray slipped over the sun. A door shut somewhere in the valley without a building to hold it. A clean, flat slam. One sound. I stood still and counted to 5. I walked away. I kept my eyes on the road out and did not look back because there was nothing I could do but leave. I haven't gone back. Boundary kept. I stay off unmapped valleys now. I file routes with trailheads when I go out. I hang prints of birds and keep the good frames out of sight. I don't explain causes. I don't answer unknown numbers. I carry the shape of that rope ring in my head and let it be what it was. A thing I found and recorded, then lost to an official hand I could not move. The rest is quiet work. I keep breathing. I keep moving. I keep a window cracked at night to hear the weather change. And when the air shifts, I say the simple words I have left. I was there. I saw it. That is all. I'm a retired police detective. I still carry habits I don't need. Counting trailblazes, reading faces in passing, double-checking a tent zipper. My doctor says that's fine. My girlfriend Mara calls it overtime. I call it sleep insurance. It usually works. We drove down from Pittsburgh in October to catch the color. The Appalachian Trail outside Damascus, Virginia, is busy on weekends and quiet by Monday. We took the established loop-in from a paved pull-off near the Creeper Trail and aimed for a known campsite on a shelf above a creek. Quiet air, predictable weather. I told Mara I wouldn't talk shop. The first night was for a small fire, instant potatoes, and me not commenting on how she stacked kindling like a little courthouse woodpile. At the trailhead bulletin board, we wrote our names and route on the sign-in sheet. The pen on the chain didn't work. I had a working pen in my pocket because of course I did. I carried 3 pens on vacation, which is also how I know I needed one. We signed and took a photo of the entry. She rolled her eyes. We hiked in. The evening cooled fast. We set the tent facing the creek. Wet leaves made the top layer slick. I walked the perimeter to check for widowmakers. Mara asked what a widowmaker is, and I told her the truth, and then said we were fine. We ate by headlamp. We talked about nothing important. For once, I didn't check my phone for ball scores. I asked if chili from a pouch counted as a vegetable and got a glare across a spoon. It doesn't. We settled by 9. The creek ran light. The air held that hollow ring you get far from road noise. Sleep came quickly. A noise woke me that didn't belong to an animal. A footfall on flat ground lands and lifts without drag. This came from the trees behind us, not the trail. I propped up and listened. I counted 2 more steps. The third stopped short. I checked my watch, 9:51. I kept my flashlight off and listened, whispering, 3 voices, one older with a rough throat. I eased the zipper and stepped out. Headlamp on. Low. Movement and then stillness. Fresh scuffs on bark at head height. Mud where a hand would land. A small glass reflection sat back in the dark like a lens. Someone watched us. I said in a steady voice that we were camping one night on a signed route and leaving before first light. I gave calm facts, not a challenge. They came in like a unit. 4 figures stepped from the tree line. One wore a cut denim vest over a rough woven shirt. Another had an old rain shell over a canvas tunic. 2 wore dark knit caps, strips of leather bound torn sleeves. Nothing theatrical. Repairs made from what they had. The oldest had an angular face and trimmed beard. He raised an empty hand and kept it up. He planned to talk first. The others watched me. Not Mara. They spread just enough to cover 3 approaches without stepping on each other's feet. Mara sat up and said my name. I told her to stay put. I gave my name and age and said I was a retired police detective. Old habit. If someone walks closer, they should know what they're walking into. It had the opposite effect. The older one stepped close and set his boot inches from mine. He looked at the tent at the creek and back at me. He smiled without top teeth and asked if I was armed. I said no. He asked if I had called anyone with our location. I said no. He asked if anyone expected a check-in that night. I said not until morning. He nodded to the others. He told us we had walked into their ground. He said we would walk out after he asked a few questions and look through our things. He said that if I moved quick, I would be cold on the ground. Then he smiled again, as if the smile softened the policy. They took our phones and my keys. He carried a small black box the size of a deck of cards with a green LED. He held it near our tent and packs. He told the one in denim to walk a circle. The device beeped near my watch, near my flashlight, and near the tent scene. He checked the scene and nodded. They knew how to find electronics. One wore an earpiece and murmured that the north side was clear. They weren't loose. They had me stand with my hands visible. They had Mara sit outside the tent. They stood our packs in a row and went through them. They didn't dump everything. They turned items and put them back. They paused on the water filter in my power bank. The older one asked where I worked before. I told him the city. I didn't lie. Lying fast in that cold slows your breathing, and he watched my chest. He said his name was Dale. He didn't care if I believed it. He asked why I announced that I used to be a cop. I said the truth, because it sometimes keeps people from escalating with someone who has seen bad outcomes. His voice went flat on the word official. He said honesty helps when you move a problem from one side of a fence to the other. They tied my hands in front with paracord. They walked us 30 yards off the campsite to a pitch, where the creek went quiet. Branches leaned against 2 trees to form a rough screen. Behind it sat a hole lined with an old tarp. That wasn't dug that day. He asked again about check-ins, rangers, anyone expecting us. I said no to the ranger because I had told none. He laid out a rule: we listen, we answer, we walk. He asked what I thought they were. I said I didn't know and wouldn't guess. He said good. He asked if we had seen anyone else. I said no. He asked what car we drove. I described it. He asked if anyone watched us park. I said a couple with 2 dogs passed by on the paved section. He asked if I had ever worn a wire outdoors at night. I said yes. His eyes didn't change. The one in the knit cap handed him a narrow camera on a cord. He passed it over us like a wand and watched a tiny screen. On Mara's jacket, he paused at the insulated pocket. He asked to see it. He took out a chemical hand warmer and shook it open. No comment. No change. They used pressure built from small weights. They timed questions so my swallow met the next line. They stood so I had to turn my head to answer both sides. The radio whispered now and then. The older man repeated my answers back with slight shifts to see if I corrected him. That trick works on tired people. I stayed with my first wording. He watched my jaw and my eyes and my hands. The first hard turn came when the one in denim got back from the trail. He had traced our steps with a light. He found where I stopped before I spoke. He pointed to the deeper dig in my left boot. He said I had angled toward the creek, not the trail. He looked satisfied. The older man studied my face. He said I should not announce ties unless I meant to use them. His voice roughened on that word again. He tapped the black box. It beeped near the hem of my vest. He found a metal zipper pull. The one in the knit cap smiled a little. They liked the rhythm more than the threat. They stood us against a tree and told us to be quiet while they checked the trail. 2 moved out. The radio hissed. The creek carried sound away. I asked to sit because my knee hates slopes now. He let me. He watched how I moved. He knew I wasn't going to run because he had Mara tied the same neat way. We sat for a span that felt like a long commercial break. Cold set in my hands. He said my name quietly and asked me to repeat how long we planned to stay. I did. He asked if I thought they were criminals. I said they were organized and cautious and knew the land. He straightened my wrists without tugging. He sent the one in the cap back to the ridge. The one in denim coughed. Down trail. A sound rose none of us expected. It started like wind. It turned into young voices in boots in loose unison. Flashlights laced through trees. A whistle blew twice. A boy asked where the spur was, and an adult told him to keep right. The older man swore under his breath and signaled with his hand. 3 fingers, then 2, then a flat palm. The 2 out front answered with a single radio click. Headlamps broke the turn and lit the lower trunks. A line came by. Boy Scouts and leaders, the kind who count every kid at every junction. They filled the path and brushed the edge. Their lights swept ground and up. They weren't stealthy. They didn't have to be. They turned night into a plan. The older man's jaw worked once. He measured the size of the group and made the only good call he had. Pack, he said. They moved with economy. He cut our cords clean and pocketed the nubs. He tucked the black box into his vest. He pushed our phones and my keys into my hands. He told us to stay in place for a slow count, then walk to the main path and fold into the group and keep moving. He said if I said a word about them, I'd regret it later. He didn't say how. The scouts spilled onto us. An adult in a red fleece looked up at the trees, and then his beam landed on our tent. I stood and raised a hand. I said we were fine, and packing up. He asked if we'd heard a coyote. I said no. He asked if we needed a trash bag. I said we had one. We joined their flow for 20 yards and then angled toward the established camp area. The kids filled the space with talk. It was safe noise. The older man's group slipped the other way. I didn't turn. At a flat where leaders had hung a laminated map, A town officer and a park ranger stood under a headlamp checking a clipboard with names and permit numbers. The badge was local. He lifted his chin. He looked at my hands, then my face, then toward the direction we came from. He didn't miss much. He asked how our night was. I said we were cutting it short and walking out. He asked if we'd seen any parties off the regular sites. He asked it like routine. His tone wanted a smooth surface. I said we saw some people moving. He nodded, like that matched what he already knew. He told the ranger he'd meet him at the south lot in 15. The ranger kept his eyes on the list. The scouts moved on. A boy laughed too loud about burnt marshmallows and then apologized. The officer told me to be safe and tapped his radio. He didn't ask our names again. I didn't offer them. He went back to the clipboard. The ranger flipped a page and wiped a drip off the plastic. I looked where our entry would sit and didn't see a pen move. We took the shortest line to the car. We left the tent standing. Poles and stakes set. We didn't go back for it. I keep a list in my head of things I've walked away from when the cost of retrieval wasn't worth the risk. That tent went on the list. On the drive out, I didn't lay out next steps to Mara. We crossed town and passed a gas station where a boy wheeled a bin of ice across wet concrete. A white SUV with a municipal decal pulled behind a building, then reappeared on the street with a second passenger. People move for reasons. Sometimes you write them down, sometimes you don't. I filed a tip when we hit service. I described the encounter without conjecture. I noted the black box with the green LED and how it beeped near current and metal. I noted radio discipline and the screen of branches near the creek. They asked for coordinates. I gave the junction and sign positions I remembered. A man thanked me and took my number. No one called back. I didn't follow up. We don't camp in that section anymore. I don't announce my background on a trail now. It sets a hook I don't like. I don't pause on slick leaf beds to listen where my boots print deep. Some people read dirt like a ledger, and I won't feed it. It was a vacation night that ended early. We were captured and then released by a group that knew their ground. We walked out under our own power, because a line of kids with bright headlamps and a clipboard made the night change shape. I don't add to that. I don't subtract from it either.